The night at Crater Lake has a way of making you feel like you're being watched by something that doesn't blink. My name is Evan Mercer. I was 37 that summer, old enough to trust routine, stubborn enough to ignore instinct when it challenged my plans. I'd driven my faded Volkswagen Vanagon, the same boxy camper I'd rebuilt with my own hands, up from Northern California, chasing cool air and quiet roads after a bruising year that left me tired of people and hungry for distance. The lake had been on my list since my 20s, a place people spoke about in lowered voices, like a cathedral carved by fire and time. I told myself I came for the views, the silence, the reset. What I didn't admit even then was that I came because silence felt safer than conversation. The Mazama Campground RV loop was almost empty when I rolled in just before dusk. July meant daylight lingered, but the air was already sharp, thin, carrying that metallic cold you only find at altitude. My Vanagon's engine clicked as it cooled, each sound amplified by the trees. Ponderosa pines stood like witnesses, trunks blackened by old burns, their tops whispering secrets I couldn't hear yet. I chose a site at the far curve of the loop, no neighbors close enough to hear me breathe. I liked it that way. Fewer variables, fewer eyes. I cooked a simple meal, ate standing up, watched the last color drain from the sky. Crater Lake went from blue to ink without ceremony. The wind died. The campground settled into something like held breath. I remember thinking how clean everything smelled. Sap, cold earth, the faint mineral tang rising from the caldera. Even the quiet felt polished. I locked up out of habit, even though I'd never locked my van at a campsite before. It wasn't fear. It was attention. Like my body noticed something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. I brushed it off, crawled into the narrow bed, and pulled my jacket tight. The Vanagon rocked gently when I shifted my weight, the suspension sighing like an old animal settling in. Sleep came in pieces. At first it was the sounds you expect. Wind teasing the needles, something small skittering across gravel, a distant owl testing the night. But then there was another sound, a pause, followed by a soft, deliberate tap. Not loud, not urgent, like a fingertip testing a surface. I held still, counting my breaths. Tap. A second later, another tap, closer this time on the driver's side panel. The metal carried it cleanly, the vibration sharp and intimate. My brain ran through explanations the way it always does when it wants to stay calm. Branch, pine cone, animal curiosity. The loop was known for deer, maybe a raccoon bold enough to investigate. I waited for the scuttle, the scrape of claws, the telltale rustle. It didn't come. Instead, there was a sound like fabric brushing metal, slow, cautious. The smell shifted. The clean pine air was threaded with something warmer, sourer, breath. I hated myself for thinking it. Hated how fast the thought took root. Breath means lungs. Lungs means someone close enough to fog the side of my van. I whispered, "Go on," to nobody, like that might send the moment away. My phone said 2:57 a.m. The blue light felt obscene in the dark, a beacon. I turned it face down and listened harder. A footstep. Gravel compressing under weight, careful to avoid noise but failing in the way only someone trying too hard fails. Another step. The sound circled toward the rear hatch. I knew the dimensions of that van the way you know the inside of your mouth. I could picture exactly where the person or thing would be standing now, how far my breath would travel if I exhaled too hard. I told myself this was the cost of solitude. You don't get the quiet without the nerves. You don't get the nerves without inventing monsters. I told myself all of it while my heart thudded against my ribs, loud enough that I worried it might give me away. The knock came again, this time not a tap, but a knuckle, testing the door with intention. 3 soft raps, polite, almost respectful. "Camp host," a voice said, low and roughened like it had been used up earlier in the night. It didn't sound quite right. Too close, too unbothered by the cold. I didn't answer. Camp hosts don't knock at 3 a.m. unless something's wrong, and when something's wrong, they don't whisper. My mind raced through rules I'd learned the hard way. Don't engage, don't reveal yourself, don't escalate. I slid my hand under the pillow where I kept a small flashlight and a tire iron. The metal was cold, reassuring in a way I didn't like. "Sir," the voice said, still low. You okay in there? The use of sir felt like a costume. I imagined a mouth too close to the door, a smile practiced for daylight. The smell of breath thickened, mingled now with something else. Oil, maybe, or old smoke. The Vanagon creaked as weight leaned against it, testing. Nope, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. Everything's fine. There was a pause long enough to stretch my nerves thin. Then a laugh, not loud, not friendly. A short exhale through the nose, like amusement. Didn't think so, the voice murmured. I felt heat rise in my chest, panic knocking on the door I was trying to keep shut. The forest pressed in, the trees closer than they'd been a minute ago, their silhouettes crowding the windows. I realized then that I hadn't seen headlights, hadn't heard another engine since dusk. Whoever this was had come on foot, or had been here already. The steps moved away, slow, unhurried, gravel again, then pine needles. I counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. They stopped at the back of the van. The latch clicked softly as fingers tested it. Locked. A sigh, not disappointed, considering. I lay there, frozen, listening to the night reorganize itself around me. The owl called again, closer now, its cry stretched thin by the cold. Somewhere, water moved deep below the rim, unseen and immense. My van felt small, my preparations flimsy. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time lost its edges. Just as my muscles began to cramp from holding still, the smell faded. The pressure against the van lifted. The steps retreated toward the trees, swallowed by needles and shadow. I waited for the sound of a car, a door, anything that would give the visitor a shape and an exit. Nothing came. I didn't sleep again. I watched the clock crawl toward morning, every sound a question mark, every silence a threat. When the sky finally lightened, I told myself I'd imagined the worst of it, that fear had filled in gaps, that daylight would make sense of the night. I opened the door just enough to let the cold in. On the ground beside the driver's side, pressed into the dust and pine pollen, was a single boot print, deep and clean, toes pointed toward the van. No matching print beside it. No trail leading away. Just that one mark, like a signature left on purpose. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at it, trying to decide which was worse. That someone had been there, or that whatever it was had known exactly how to leave without being seen. I didn't erase the boot print. I told myself I should smooth it over with my shoe, kick dust across it, pretend it never existed, but something in me refused. Erasing it felt like lying to myself, and I'd already spent too much of my life doing that. Instead, I stood there in the thin morning light, breath fogging, studying the impression like it might explain itself if I stared long enough. The tread was worn unevenly, heel deeper than toe, as if the person leaned back on it while standing there, waiting, listening. The rest of the campground woke slowly. A distant engine coughed to life. A door slammed somewhere down the loop. Normal sounds returned, but they felt staged, like props wheeled onto a set after the real scene had ended. I made coffee on the small propane stove, the hiss too loud, the smell suddenly cloying. My hands shook just enough to slosh hot liquid onto my knuckle. The sting grounded me, pulled me back into my body. By mid-morning, I convinced myself to walk to the rim trail. Movement helps me think. It always has. The path wound through trees that thinned as it climbed, the lake revealing itself in flashes of impossible blue. Tourists appeared. Families, couples, cameras clicking. Laughter echoed off stone. It should have comforted me. Instead, it sharpened a sense of unreality, like I'd crossed into a different story without leaving the first one behind. I mentioned the knock to a ranger at a viewpoint, tried to keep my tone casual. He listened politely, eyes scanning the crowd more than my face. Probably a curious camper, he said, or wildlife. Folks forget how sound carries up here. And the boot print, I asked. He shrugged. Hard to say. People walk around at night. Not much we can do unless something happens. Something had happened, but I didn't have words that would make it solid enough to hand over. I thanked him and walked back, the lake's vastness pressing at my back like a held breath. The afternoon heat never really arrived. Even in July, the cold clung to shaded places, seeping into my bones. I noticed things I hadn't before. A scrape on the lower panel of my van, fresh and shallow, as if something hard had brushed against it. Pine needles disturbed near the rear tire, arranged in a way that felt intentional. I checked the latch again, then again, the metal biting my fingers. By dusk, the campground thinned. Engines departed. Spaces emptied. I considered leaving with them, the thought rising unbidden and insistent. Pride smothered it. I hated the idea of being chased off by a sound and a print. I told myself staying was a way of taking control back, of proving that fear didn't get to rewrite my plans. Night came faster the second time. I cooked inside the van, windows cracked just enough to let steam escape. The forest smelled different now, damp like rain that never fell, layered with a faint rot. I ate without appetite, listening to the way darkness rearranged familiar sounds. When full night settled, it felt heavier than before, as if the air itself had thickened. I lay back on the bed, eyes open, counting the seconds between breaths. Midnight passed without incident. 1 a.m., 2. Each quiet minute lulled me into a dangerous calm. Maybe last night had been a test and I'd passed by doing nothing. Maybe whatever it was had moved on. At 2:41 a.m., the smell came back. Not breath this time, something older. Wet leather, cold iron. It slid through the cracked window like a finger tracing my spine. I sat up slowly, heart already racing, listening. There was no knock. Instead, there was a sound I couldn't place at first, a drag, irregular, like something heavy being moved carefully across the ground. It circled the van, once, twice, the rhythm changing as if whoever was out there adjusted their grip. My mouth went dry. I pictured hands on a length of chain, boots braced in gravel. A shadow crossed the frosted glass of the side window. Not a full silhouette, just a distortion of light, as if something tall leaned in and then pulled back. I held the flashlight tight enough to make my fingers ache, thumb hovering over the switch. "Evan," the voice said softly, "my name." It landed in the van like a dropped plate, shattering the thin calm I'd built. No one here knew my name. I hadn't introduced myself to anyone. I hadn't said it out loud since arriving. The voice wasn't rough this time. It was closer to neutral, almost conversational, as if testing how it sounded. "Evan," it said again, nearer the rear hatch. "You awake?" I didn't answer. Every instinct screamed not to. The drag stopped. Silence pressed in, absolute and suffocating. I imagined eyes inches from the glass, watching my outline, counting my breaths. My thoughts raced, grasping at explanations that collapsed as soon as they formed. Camp host? No. Ranger? No. Drunk camper? Not with that patience. Not with my name on their tongue. The latch rattled, harder this time. A test, then a pull. Locked. A sharp exhale followed, annoyed. The voice changed, the friendliness stripped away. "You should open up," it said. "It's cold out here." A laugh bubbled up in my chest, wild and hysterical, and I swallowed it down. Cold for who? The thing outside didn't sound like it felt the temperature at all. The drag resumed, closer now, right beneath the bed. Metal scraped stone. Sparks flashed briefly, reflected in the window, steel on rock. Panic surged, hot and blinding. I flipped the flashlight on, flooding the van with harsh white light, and shouted, "Get away from my vehicle." The sound outside froze. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the laugh came, full this time, loud and unafraid. It echoed off trees, wrong in the way it didn't seem to lose strength with distance. "That's better," the voice said. "Now I know you're really in there." Something heavy struck the side panel, not enough to dent it, but enough to make the van shudder. I scrambled for my phone, dialing without looking. No service. The screen mocked me with empty bars. Another strike, harder. The suspension groaned. I made a decision then, born of terror and clarity in equal measure. Escape beats endurance. I threw myself into the driver's seat, keys already in the ignition. The engine hesitated, 1 second to 2, before roaring to life. Headlights cut through the trees, catching a shape at the edge of the beam. It was taller than I expected. Thinner. A jacket hung off it like it didn't belong. In its hands, something long and dark dragged a groove in the dirt. The face stayed in shadow, but the smile caught the light, pale and deliberate. I slammed the van into gear and hit the gas. The tires spun, gravel spraying. The shape lunged, missing the door by inches. I didn't look back. The loop blurred past, trees whipping by, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd black out. I burst onto the main road, tires screaming, and didn't slow until the campground was a dark smear in the mirrors. I drove until dawn, painted the sky in weak colors, until my hands stopped shaking and my throat burned from breathing too fast. I pulled over at a turnout miles away and sat there, engine idling, listening to the ordinary sounds of morning. When the sun fully rose, I understood something I'd resisted the night before. This wasn't about bravery or pride or proving anything. It was about listening to the quiet unease, to the signals that don't come with explanations. I'd wanted the silence of Crater Lake to heal me. Instead, it showed me how thin the line is between solitude and vulnerability. I never went back to that loop. I never reported what happened because I didn't have evidence that would survive daylight. What I had was memory, sharp and unyielding, and a rule I carry with me now like a talisman. When the night speaks your name, you don't wait to hear what it wants next. I didn't stop driving when the sun came up. I told myself I was just putting distance between me and the campground, but the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I was afraid that if I stopped long enough to breathe, the night would catch up with me. The road unwound through pine and rock, the world returning to its daytime proportions, but my body stayed locked in the posture of escape. My shoulders were tight. My jaw ached from clenching. Every dark patch in the trees looked like a place someone could step out from. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that tall, thin shape pacing me with impossible patience. By late morning, I pulled into a small town I don't remember the name of. Gas station, diner, post office. The kind of place that feels stitched together by routine. I parked where I could see the entrance, where sunlight washed the windshield clean. Inside the diner, the smell of bacon and coffee hit me like a wall. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made my stomach churn. The waitress asked how I wanted my eggs. Her voice was normal, unremarkable. I almost laughed at how close I'd come to forgetting what that sounded like. Scrambled, I said, and the word felt like a victory. As I ate, I tried to build a version of the night that fit into daylight logic. A drifter. A prank gone wrong. Someone mentally unwell who got lucky with a guess about my name. Each explanation collapsed under the weight of details I couldn't sand down. The smell, the patience, the way the voice changed when it realized I was afraid. Fear has texture. That night had too much of it to be coincidence. I drove again, south this time, away from the caldera, away from the altitude that made everything feel closer to the sky and farther from help. The Vanagon hummed, faithful and tired. I rested my hand on the dashboard, a small gesture of gratitude that surprised me with its intensity. Machines don't judge you for leaving, they just keep going. Days passed. The memory didn't fade. It reorganized itself, settling into corners of my mind where it waited for quiet moments. I started sleeping in well-lit campgrounds, near families and noise. I left curtains open. I checked locks twice, 3 times. When someone walked past at night, my heart spiked before my brain could catch up. There was one thing I couldn't shake, the way the voice had said my name like it had been practiced. I dug through my own habits, searching for leaks. Had I introduced myself within earshot of someone? Spoken on the phone outside? Left paperwork visible? The answer was always the same. Maybe, followed by the sinking realization that maybe was all it needed. Months later, back home, I was changing the oil when I noticed something I'd missed in my haste to leave. On the underside of the van, near the rear axle, there was a fresh gouge, deep and straight, metal shaved clean. It matched the groove I'd glimpsed in the dirt, the sparks that flashed like a warning I'd almost ignored. I traced it with my finger, the edge sharp enough to draw blood if I wasn't careful. That was when the last of my denial drained away. Whatever came to my campsite that night hadn't been improvising. It had tools, it had time, and it had chosen a moment when I was alone, tired, and certain that solitude was the same thing as safety. I don't tell this story to scare people away from RV camping. I still go. I still park under trees and cook simple meals and chase quiet, but I listen differently now. I respect the way certain places press back when you settle into them, how the environment itself can become an accomplice to whatever waits just beyond the beam of your headlights. Crater Lake is beautiful. It is vast and ancient and indifferent. At night, it doesn't care who you are or why you came. It doesn't raise its voice, it whispers. And sometimes, if you're alone and far enough from help, it whispers your name. I learned that fear isn't always a thing that arrives screaming. Sometimes it knocks politely, sometimes it waits. And the most important lesson, the one that stays with me every time I turn the key and feel the engine catch, is this: when the night shows you who it is, believe it the first time. The first time the canyon said my name, it sounded like it already knew me. I didn't stop walking when I heard it. That's the part I still argue with myself about at night, whether I should have frozen or run or answered. But I didn't. I kept my boots moving along the packed red dirt trail, the late afternoon sun slipping low enough to stretch the shadows into long crooked fingers that clung to the canyon walls. I told myself it was just an echo. Zion is full of them. Sound bends here. It doubles back on itself. It plays tricks. That's what I told myself. Because the alternative, that something had shaped its voice to fit my name, was a thought I wasn't ready to carry yet. My name is Caleb Mercer. I was 38 that spring, born and raised in Flagstaff, Arizona, the kind of place where wilderness is normal enough that you stop treating it like a guest and start treating it like furniture. I'd been RV camping for almost 15 years by then, long enough to believe I understood the rules, long enough to believe that if you respected the land, it would leave you alone. April of 2021 had been a strange month already. The country felt brittle, like it might snap if you pressed it too hard. I'd been on the road alone for weeks in my old white Volkswagen Rialta. Compact, stubborn, louder than it should have been, but reliable in the way old things sometimes are when they've outlived everyone's expectations. I called it Atlas, mostly as a joke. It carried my whole life on its back. Zion National Park was supposed to be a pause, just a few nights at the South Campground, a reset before heading north. I checked in late afternoon, parked beneath cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out, the air cool and clean in that way that feels borrowed from somewhere older than you. The canyon walls rose around the campground like quiet witnesses, redstone layered and scarred, holding centuries of stories they never volunteered. The place felt watchful, not threatening, just aware. I noticed the sound first, even before anything happened. Zion doesn't do silence the way deserts do. Sound here ricochets. Footsteps don't fade, they linger. A cough from 2 sites over seems to hang in the air longer than it should, as if deciding where to land. When the wind moves through the canyon, it doesn't rush. It whispers, it slides along stone and comes back altered, like it learned something while it was gone. That first evening, I cooked a simple meal on the fold-out stove, watched families settle in, kids chasing each other between picnic tables. Everything looked normal. That was part of what made it easier to ignore the tension humming just under my skin. I told myself it was just fatigue. Too many miles. Too much solitude. As the sun dropped behind the canyon rim, the temperature fell fast. Cold crept up from the ground, pressing through the soles of my boots. I zipped my jacket higher, locked the RV, and decided to take a short walk before dark, just to stretch my legs, just to breathe. I followed a side trail that curved away from the campground, not far, nothing marked as dangerous. The light shifted quickly, gold turning to rust, rust to bruised purple. The canyon narrowed as I walked, walls drawing closer, the air cooling another degree with every step. My footsteps sounded wrong here, too loud, too sharp. That's when I heard it. Caleb. Not shouted, not whispered. Spoken the way someone says your name when they're standing right behind you, close enough that you feel their breath before you turn. I stopped then. My spine tightened, every muscle bracing at once. The sound had come from my left, somewhere up the canyon wall. I scanned the rock face, half expecting to see someone perched on a ledge, maybe a hiker messing with me. There was no one. "Hello?" I called out, hating the way my voice echoed back thinner, smaller. No answer. Just the canyon holding onto my words and letting them fall apart. I laughed, short and sharp. "Get a grip," I muttered. My own voice sounded steadier than I felt. People hike here all day. Someone could have overheard my name at the campground. Kids mess around. Sound travels. I turned back toward the RV, pace quicker now. As I walked, I felt that familiar internal resistance rise, the part of me that prides itself on being rational, experienced, unshakable. I've always trusted my ability to explain things, to strip fear down to mechanics. But another part of me, quieter and older, had gone still. Listening. That night, the campground settled into its usual rhythm. Doors closing, laughter fading, generators humming, then shutting off one by one. By 10, the place was mostly dark. I lay on the narrow bed inside Atlas, listening to the canyon breathe. That's the best way I can describe it. Breathing. The wind moved through the RV vents in slow pulses, rising and falling like something sleeping nearby. Every so often, a sound would carry from far off, a clink of metal, a cough, a distant voice, and instead of fading, it would repeat, softer, then softer again, until it wasn't quite the same sound anymore. I told myself not to think about the trail, about my name. I focused on the familiar creaks of the RV cooling, the tick of contracting metal. Those were known sounds, safe sounds. Sometime after midnight, I woke to knocking. 3 soft raps, not on the RV door, on the side panel near my head. I held my breath listening. My heart thudded so loud I was sure it would give me away. Another knock followed, slower this time, deliberate. "Caleb," a voice said, muffled by the thin walls. I sat up so fast the world tilted. My mouth went dry. That voice, it wasn't distorted by echo. It was close, right outside. "Who is it?" I asked, immediately regretting it. Silence. I reached for my phone, checked the time, 12:47 a.m. No missed calls, no alerts. I slid out of bed, moving as quietly as I could, and peered through the small side window. The campground was empty. Moonlight washed the picnic tables pale. No shadows moved. No figures stood near the RV. I didn't open the door. I stood there for a long time, hand hovering inches from the lock, telling myself that if someone needed help, they'd speak again. They'd knock harder. They'd say more than my name. Nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back to bed. I slept in fragments, dreams tangled with canyon walls closing in, voices slipping through cracks I couldn't seal. Morning came bright and clear, almost cruel in its normalcy. Sunlight flooded the campground, birds chattered, families packed up gear. I drank coffee outside, replaying the night in my head, sanding down the edges of fear until it felt manageable. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe exhaustion filled in the gaps. I decided to hike deeper into the park that day, prove to myself I wasn't rattled. That decision, that quiet, stubborn need to reclaim control, was the real mistake. By early afternoon, I was miles from the campground, the canyon towering higher, the trail narrower. The air smelled of dust and stone warming under the sun. Every sound felt amplified. My pack strap creaked with each step. My own breathing sounded intrusive. I rounded a bend where the canyon tightened, walls pressing close enough that the sky narrowed to a blue ribbon overhead. "Caleb?" The canyon said again. This time, it came from everywhere. I stopped dead, heart slamming against my ribs, the sound of my name folding over itself, bouncing wall to wall, repeating, overlapping, some voices higher, some lower, none quite the same, all unmistakably mine. I covered my ears. The canyon didn't stop speaking. And that was the moment I understood. This wasn't about being alone. This was about being known. I don't remember deciding to run. What I remember is the way my body moved before my mind caught up. Boots scraping against stone, breath tearing out of my chest in sharp, ugly pulls. The canyon kept my name with it as I moved, like it had hooked something into me and refused to let go. Every step triggered another echo. Caleb, 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 some lagging behind me, some arriving before I did, as if the sound knew where I was going before I did. I forced myself to stop. That took more courage than running. My legs shook as I braced my hands against my knees, sweat cooling too fast on my back. The echoes faded, thinning into the usual canyon noise, the wind, distant footsteps, the faraway murmur of water. I waited, counting my breaths, letting logic claw its way back in. You're panicking, I told myself. Sound funnels here. Names repeat because you're listening for them. Your brain fills the gaps. I straightened slowly, scanning the rock faces. The canyon looked unchanged, ancient, impassive. If something was wrong, it wasn't showing it. I turned around and started back the way I came, walking this time, every nerve strung tight. The trail felt longer now, each bend unfamiliar, like it had subtly rearranged itself while I wasn't looking. My throat ached with thirst, but I didn't stop to drink. Stopping felt dangerous. That's when I noticed the smell. It drifted in faint at first. Metallic, sour, layered over the dry mineral scent of stone. Not rot, not smoke. Something closer to cold iron and damp earth. It didn't belong in open air. It belonged underground. I slowed, heart hammering again, and realized the smell grew stronger near a narrow side passage branching off the main trail. It wasn't marked. Just a dark crease in the rock, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Cold air spilled from it, brushing my skin like fingers. No, I whispered, backing away. From inside the passage, something shifted. Not footsteps, more like weight settling, stone adjusting around something that had been there longer than it should have been. Caleb, a voice called softly. This one wasn't an echo. It didn't bounce or bend. It came straight at me, clean and precise. It sounded like my father. He'd died 3 years earlier. Sudden heart attack. No warning. No chance to say goodbye. I hadn't thought about him in days. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the canyon had reached into the quiet parts of me, the places I kept sealed. My chest tightened painfully. That's not funny, I said aloud, my voice cracking despite myself. The voice sighed, disappointed. You never listen. That was something he used to say. I stumbled back onto the main trail, pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't look at the passage again. I didn't want to see what might be leaning closer. By the time I reached the campground, the sun was already dipping low again, shadows stretching long and sharp. I felt exposed, like I'd brought something back with me, something clinging to my thoughts, my breath. People smiled as I passed, nodded politely, completely unaware that the canyon had been speaking to me all day. That night I didn't cook. I didn't wander. I locked Atlas early and sat inside with the lights off, listening. The campground sounds thinned as evening settled. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed, then fell silent. A dog barked once. The wind rose, threading through the canyon with purpose. The knocking started just after 9. Not gentle this time. A firm rap on the door. Once. Twice. Campground host, a man's voice called. Need to check something. Relief flooded me so fast it made me dizzy. I reached for the door before the doubt could catch up. My hand closed around the handle and froze. The voice hadn't echoed. Every sound in Zion echoed. Voices bent and scattered, arriving twice, 3 times. This voice hadn't done that. It sat flat against the door, deadened, like it had been pressed directly into the metal. I leaned close, peering through the peephole. No one stood there. The space outside the door was empty, lit pale by moonlight. The picnic table cast a long shadow, unmoving. The cottonwood leaves rustled softly. Caleb, the voice said again, right behind my ear. I spun, heart exploding in my chest. The RV interior was empty. Cabinets closed, curtains still. My own reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, eyes wide, face drained of color. The knocking came again, this time from inside the walls, metal flexed, something pressed outward, testing seams. I backed toward the bed, breath coming fast and shallow. Stop, I said, louder than I meant to. Just stop. The pressure eased. The RV went still. For a moment, just a moment, I thought it was over. Then the voices started. Not 1, not 2, dozens. They rose from the canyon all at once, names spilling into the campground, overlapping, colliding, filling the air with an awful intimacy. Not just mine. Other names. Familiar ones. Strangers. Children. Adults. Some laughing. Some crying. All calling out to someone they expected to answer. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound vibrated through the RV frame, through my bones. The windows rattled. The ground itself seemed to hum. Outside, lights flicked on in neighboring RVs. Doors opened. People stepped out, confusion written across their faces. I watched through a narrow gap in the curtain as a man across the way looked up at the canyon walls, his expression shifting from annoyance to fear. "Did you hear that?" he called to his wife. The canyon answered him in her voice. She went rigid. "How did you?" The scream cut off abruptly. Panic surged through the campground. People shouted. Engines coughed to life. A child cried somewhere close, the sound thin and sharp. The voices grew louder, more insistent, threading through the chaos like hands pulling at sleeves. "Come closer. Just listen. We're right here." I realized then what the canyon wanted. Not bodies. Not noise. I grabbed my keys, fingers numb, and bolted for the driver's seat. Atlas shuddered awake reluctantly, engine protesting as I slammed it into gear. The headlights carved two pale tunnels through the dark, catching faces frozen in terror by people standing rooted as if unsure whether to flee or follow the sound calling them. As I drove, the voices chased me, pouring down the road, slipping through open windows, crowding the RV with borrowed memories and stolen tones. I kept my eyes forward, jaw clenched, repeating one thing over and over in my head. Don't listen. Don't answer. The park exit loomed ahead, the road narrowing one last time between towering stone walls. For a terrifying second, the engine sputtered, headlights dimming as if the canyon itself were leaning in, weighing the RV down. "Caleb," my father's voice said gently, "you can rest now." I screamed, slammed the accelerator, and the engine roared back to life. The canyon fell away behind me, the voices snapping off all at once, like a door slamming shut. I didn't stop driving until dawn. I slept in a gas station parking lot miles away, exhaustion dragging me under despite the fear still buzzing in my veins. When I woke, the world felt thinner, like a layer had been peeled back and never replaced. I never went back to Zion. I still camp, still drive Atlas. But I don't hike narrow canyons anymore. I don't wander alone at dusk. And when the wind carries a voice that sounds almost familiar, I don't wait to see if it knows my name. Some places don't want you lost. They want you listening. I thought leaving would end it. That was the lie I carried with me for weeks afterward. That distance could cauterize what Zion had opened. I told myself the canyon was a closed system, that whatever happened there stayed there, locked between red walls and ancient stone. I drove north, then west, then south again, chasing open spaces that felt less vertical, less intimate. Deserts where sound died quickly. Plains where the horizon gave you room to breathe. But the thing about echoes is this. Once you've learned how they work, you start hearing them everywhere. The first night I camped again, outside a small BLM site in Nevada, I woke to silence so complete it felt aggressive. No wind, no insects, just the soft tick of Atlas cooling. I lay there staring at the ceiling, heart steady but alert, waiting for something to break the stillness. Nothing did. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like anticipation. In daylight, I functioned fine. I refilled water tanks, checked tire pressure, made polite small talk with other campers. I even laughed a few times. But my internal compass had shifted. I found myself cataloging sounds unconsciously. Where they came from, how they behaved, whether they belonged. Any noise that lingered too long made my skin prickle. Weeks passed. Then months. I convinced myself I'd processed it. Trauma has a way of disguising itself as adaptation. I adjusted my routines, avoided certain landscapes, kept moving. Motion became my shield. If I stayed ahead of the silence, it couldn't catch me. That illusion broke one evening in northern New Mexico. I'd parked near a shallow canyon, not Zion deep, not imposing. Just a modest cut in the earth where a dry river once ran. I didn't even think twice about it. Cooked dinner. Watched the sun bleed out across the sky. The air cooled fast, carrying the smell of sage and dust. As darkness settled, a group of campers nearby started a fire. Laughter drifted over, warm and human, safe. Then, between their voices, I heard my name. Not loud, not clear, just close enough to notice. I didn't react. That was the progress, I told myself. Brains misfire, trauma echoes. You don't give it power by responding. Caleb, the voice said again. This one was wrong in a different way. It wasn't my father. It wasn't me. It was empty, like a recording played back without understanding. I stood slowly, every muscle tense, and stepped outside the RV. The night air felt thicker than it should have been, pressing against my chest. The nearby campers didn't react. Their fire popped. Someone told a joke. Life went on. The voice came from the canyon, not inside it, from the rim. I followed the sound without meaning to, feet moving on instinct, stopping just short of the drop-off. The darkness below was absolute, swallowing the starlight. Cold air rose from it, carrying that same metallic scent I remembered too well. You're far from home, the voice said. I shook my head, anger flaring hot and sudden. No, I said. You don't get to follow me. The canyon answered by giving me silence. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the world to tilt again. It didn't. Eventually, the cold drove me back to the RV. I locked the door, slept lightly, dreamed of stone listening. In the morning, I left without looking back. That was the pattern after Zion. Not constant terror, but intrusion. Moments where sound behaved incorrectly, where voices slipped just a fraction out of sync with their owners, where my name surfaced in places it had no business being. I didn't tell anyone. How do you explain something that only exists when you're paying attention? How do you warn people without sounding unhinged? Instead, I started researching. Late nights, parked beneath indifferent stars, scrolling through forums and obscure articles, accounts buried under skepticism and jokes, hikers hearing loved ones calling from impossible places, campers following voices into slot canyons and never coming back, rangers dismissing it as acoustics, stress, dehydration, always acoustics, except the stories never lined up perfectly. The voices weren't random. They were personal, intimate. They knew when to sound comforting, when to sound urgent, when to sound disappointed. What unsettled me most wasn't the fear. It was the implication that the land wasn't hostile. It was curious. I began to see American camping differently after that. The way we talk about it, as escape, as freedom, as communion with nature. We romanticize solitude without considering what solitude does when it looks back at you. We assume the wilderness is empty because it doesn't speak our language. But what if it's been listening all along? The thought followed me everywhere, in forests where trees crowded close, dampening sound until your own footsteps felt intrusive, in deserts where the wind erased tracks faster than they were made, in canyons where your voice didn't belong to you anymore once you let it go. I'm more careful now. I camp in places where sound behaves honestly. I travel with noise, music low, windows cracked, something to anchor the air. I don't answer when something calls my name unless I can see the mouth it comes from, and I leave before dusk every time. Some nights, though, when the wind hits Atlas just right, I hear it. My name stretched thin, woven into the movement of air and metal. Not demanding, not pleading, waiting. I don't know if the canyon in Zion was unique or if it was just better at what it does than most places. I don't know if what followed me was an echo or if the act of listening tuned me to something that was already there. What I do know is this: the wilderness doesn't need to chase you to keep you. All it needs is your attention. And once you've given it that, once you've let it learn the shape of your name, you don't walk away unchanged. You just learn how to keep moving. For a long time, I believed movement was enough. If I kept Atlas rolling, if I crossed state lines often enough, maybe whatever had learned my name would lose the thread. Roads have a way of convincing you that distance equals safety. Mile markers pass, landscapes change. Fear feels smaller when it's shrinking in the rearview mirror. But fear doesn't live in places, it lives in patterns. The realization came on a quiet night in southern Utah. Ironic, I know. I hadn't planned it that way. I was just cutting through, aiming for open desert farther west. I pulled into a dispersed camping area well before sunset, flat land this time, wide sky, nothing vertical enough to throw sound back at me. I checked the map twice. No canyons, no cliffs, no narrow passages. I told myself I was being smart. As dusk settled, the temperature dropped sharply. The smell of dust and dry grass filled the air, clean and simple. I sat outside Atlas, wrapped in a jacket, watching the stars push through the fading blue. For the first time in months, my shoulders loosened. My breathing slowed. This place felt neutral. That should have warned me. When the sound came, it didn't echo. It didn't travel. It didn't announce itself. It arrived already close. Caleb. I didn't jump. I didn't panic. I closed my eyes. That was the moment of truth. Not fear, but recognition. The voice wasn't coming from the land this time. It wasn't rising from stone or slipping through wind. It was inside my head, not imagined, not remembered, placed. I stood slowly, every movement deliberate, grounding myself in sensation, the grit under my boots, the cold air in my lungs, the solid weight of the RV behind me. "You don't get to do that," I said quietly. Saying it aloud mattered. It drew a line. The voice didn't respond. Instead, the silence changed. It thickened, pressing in, like the world was leaning closer to hear what I'd say next. I understood then what the canyon had been teaching me, patiently, relentlessly. It wasn't calling to lure me somewhere. It was listening to see if I'd answer. All those stories I'd read, the disappearances, the hikers found miles off trail, the campers who walked into darkness chasing something familiar, they weren't taken by force. They were invited by recognition, by the need to respond when your name is spoken. I went back inside Atlas and locked the door, not because I thought it would keep anything out, but because ritual matters. Boundaries matter. I sat on the edge of the bed until my heartbeat steadied, until the silence returned to its normal shape. The voice didn't come back that night, or the next. Months have passed now. I still travel, still camp, but with intention sharpened by fear and respect. I choose places where sound disperses instead of gathers. I camp earlier. I leave sooner. I don't chase quiet anymore. I let it be. And when people ask me why I don't hike slot canyons, why I don't linger at dusk, why I flinch when the wind bends just right around rock, I tell them the truth. Just not all of it. I tell them the wilderness is powerful. I tell them sound behaves differently out there. I tell them to trust their instincts. What I don't tell them is this. Some landscapes don't want your body. They want your attention. They want the part of you that answers without thinking, that turns when your name is spoken, that believes familiarity equals safety. Once they learn how you respond, they don't have to chase you. They just wait. Zion still exists, unchanged. Families still hike its trails. RVs still park beneath cottonwoods. Laughter still rises and scatters against red stone. Most people will never hear what I heard. But every now and then someone does. And if you ever find yourself in a canyon where sound lingers too long, if you hear your name spoken from a place you can't see, if the voice sounds almost right, almost kind, don't answer. Not because you're afraid, but because some echoes are not reflections. They are invitations. And once you accept them, the canyon never forgets the sound of you leaving. The first thing I remember is how quiet my own breathing sounded when the forest stopped answering back. My name is Caleb Warren. I was 39 years old in May of 2022, born and raised in eastern Kentucky, the kind of place where you grow up believing the woods are honest, as long as you are. I'd spent most of my life around trees, trails, rivers, and back roads, and by then I'd logged thousands of miles in an RV without ever feeling truly afraid of where I parked it. Fear, to me, had always belonged to people, not places. That belief was what carried us into the Smoky Mountains that spring. We had driven down from Kentucky with our small family, my wife, Erin, our 10-year-old son, Lucas, and our daughter, Maggie, who had just turned 7. The RV was a used Volkswagen camper conversion I'd rebuilt myself over 2 winters. Every bolt tightened with the confidence of a man who believes preparation is the same thing as control. Aaron teased me about it the whole drive, said I trusted machines more than intuition. I laughed it off. The Smoky Mountains RV park sat just outside the tourist-heavy areas, tucked close enough to the forest that the air felt damp even at noon. The park brochure promised quiet trails, family-friendly camping, and authentic mountain atmosphere. It delivered on all of that, at least on the surface. Towering trees closed in tight around the gravel lanes. The light filtered through layers of green like it had to work for permission to touch the ground. Our campsite backed up to a narrow trailhead marked by a weathered wooden sign. No map, just carved words. Ridge Pass, 1.2 miles. The ranger at check-in barely looked up when I asked about it. Old trail, he said. Doesn't see much traffic anymore. Loops back near the creek. Something about the way he said anymore lodged in my head, but I didn't press. I'd already told the kids we'd hike it before dinner. Erin gave me that look, the one that said don't push it if it feels wrong. But she didn't argue. She trusted me. That trust would sit heavy in my chest later. By late afternoon, the campground settled into that familiar RV rhythm. Engines cooling, screen doors slapping shut, someone laughing 2 sites down, the smell of propane grills mixing with pine and damp earth. Normal. Comforting. I told myself that unease was just fatigue from the drive. We started the hike around dusk. The trail narrowed almost immediately, the forest swallowing sound in a way that felt intentional, like it was listening more than we were. Lucas ran ahead with a stick in his hand, pretending it was a sword. Maggie stayed close to Erin, her fingers hooked into the back pocket of her jeans. I walked behind them, the way fathers do when they believe danger announces itself. At first, the trail was nothing but roots and packed dirt. Then it began to slope upward, the air growing cooler, heavier. The smell changed too. Not rot exactly, but something damp and metallic underneath the green. Erin wrinkled her nose and asked if rain was coming. I told her it was just mountain air. That was my first rationalization. About 20 minutes in, the forest shifted. I don't know how else to describe it. The trees grew closer together, trunks thicker, bark darker. The light thinned until dusk felt closer than it should have. Even the birds went quiet. No cicadas, no wind, just the sound of our footsteps and the faint creak of leather from my backpack straps. Lucas slowed down. "Dad," he said without turning around, "did you hear that?" I listened. Nothing. "Probably a deer," I said. "They move quiet." He nodded, but he didn't speed back up. We reached a bend where the trail dipped sharply, and that's where we heard it again. A sound like someone knocking wood against wood. 3 slow taps. Not rhythmic, not random either. Somewhere to our left, deeper in the trees. Erin stopped walking. "Caleb," she whispered. That didn't sound like an animal. I told myself it was branches shifting, even as I noticed there was no wind. The forest stood completely still, like it was holding its breath. "We're fine," I said, louder than necessary. "Trail loops back. We'll be at the creek soon." Another knock answered me, this one closer. Maggie tightened her grip on Erin's hand. "Mommy," she said, voice thin, "someone's playing hide and seek." That thought chilled me more than the sound itself. Children don't invent fear. They interpret it. I told everyone to keep moving. The trail grew uneven, slanted, forcing us to walk single file. My heart picked up pace, not from exertion, but from the way my instincts kept tripping over my logic. I'd camped in bear country. I'd heard coyotes scream at night. None of that felt like this. This felt directed. Then came the smell again, stronger now. Iron and wet leaves. Old water. We reached what should have been the creek. Instead, the trail opened into a shallow clearing with a dry, cracked bed where water should have been running. The stones were dark, stained in a way that didn't look natural. Erin stared at them too long before speaking. "This isn't right," she said. "The ranger said there was water." I didn't answer immediately. My mouth had gone dry. That was when we heard footsteps. Not scrambling, not running. Slow, deliberate steps crunching leaves somewhere behind us on the trail. I turned around and saw nothing between the trees. No movement, no silhouette, just shadow piled on shadow. "Hello?" I called out, hating how my voice wavered. The footsteps stopped. Then 3 knocks echoed again, this time directly ahead of us, deeper in the forest where no trail existed. Erin's breathing changed, shorter, faster. I could feel panic rising in her, in the kids, and in myself, but mine came with resistance, a stubborn refusal to accept what my body already knew. "We're turning back," I said. As soon as I said it, the forest answered. The knocking started again, faster now. Not one source, but 2. Maybe 3. All around us, wood on wood, knock, knock, knock. Lucas began to cry. Maggie buried her face in Erin's side. That was the moment denial collapsed into dread. I grabbed Lucas's shoulder and pushed us back the way we'd come, but the trail looked wrong, narrower, steeper, like it had shifted while we weren't looking. The trees leaned inward, branches overlapping, blocking what little light remained. Dusk had slipped into something darker, faster than it should have. The footsteps returned, closer now. Too close. I didn't look back again. We moved fast, stumbling, breath-ragged, every sound amplified inside my skull. Somewhere to our right, something exhaled, long and low, almost human. Erin sobbed quietly, trying not to let the kids hear her fear, but they felt it anyway. Fear doesn't stay contained, it spreads. The knocking stopped all at once. That silence was worse, because silence means listening. The trail bent sharply, and through the trees ahead, I finally saw it. The faint glow of campground lights bleeding through branches like a promise. We broke into a run. Behind us, something ran too. I don't remember reaching the edge of the trees. I remember bursting into the open gravel lane, the sound of generators and distant laughter crashing back into existence like reality snapping into place. We didn't stop until we were inside the RV, door locked, blinds pulled down with shaking hands. For a long time, none of us spoke. Then Lucas asked the question that still follows me into sleep. "Dad," he said softly, "why did it follow us until the lights?" I didn't have an answer for Lucas, not then. I told him something small and harmless, that animals don't like light, that fear makes things feel bigger than they are, but the words felt hollow, even as I spoke them. The truth was, the question had already rooted itself somewhere deep in me, and it was growing. Why did it stop at the lights? The RV felt smaller than it ever had that night. The familiar creaks of cooling metal sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind nudged the frame just enough to make Erin flinch. Maggie refused to let go of her jacket, even after we were inside, as if she believed the forest might reach through the walls and take it back. I stepped outside alone to lock the storage compartments, telling myself I needed air, that I was grounding myself in routine. The campground looked normal, too normal. String lights glowed softly between trees. A couple laughed near a fire pit down the lane. Someone strummed a guitar off-key. It was the kind of scene people pay money to photograph. And yet the tree line behind our site looked darker than it had earlier, the shadows deeper, thicker, like pooled ink. I stood there longer than necessary, listening. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly, from beyond the reach of the campground lights, I heard it again. Knock. Just one this time. Slow. Testing. I didn't call out. I didn't move. I just stood there, heart pounding, watching the edge of the forest like it might blink. Nothing followed. No second knock. No footsteps. I went back inside and told Erin we were leaving first thing in the morning. She nodded too quickly. "I already packed most of the loose stuff," she said, "just in case." That hurt more than I expected, not because she was wrong, but because she'd known before I admitted it to myself. We tried to sleep. That's a lie. We lay down in the dark and waited. The kids fell into shallow, restless sleep first, exhaustion finally outweighing fear. Erin stayed awake beside me, her hand wrapped around mine so tightly my fingers went numb. Every few minutes, she whispered my name just to hear me answer. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. Not the gradual mountain cool, but a sudden biting cold that seeped through the RV walls. I pulled the blanket higher and reached to adjust the thermostat. That was when we heard the first knock on the RV. It came from the rear panel, solid, close, undeniable. Erin gasped, clamping a hand over her mouth. The knock came again, 3 times, just like before. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up slowly, every muscle screaming not to. The logical part of my brain searched for explanations. Kids messing around, a drunk camper, a branch falling, but none of them fit the weight of the sound, the intention behind it. Caleb, Erin whispered, tears already streaking down her face. Don't open it. I won't, I said, and I meant it. The knocking moved. It traveled along the side of the RV, deliberate and unhurried, as if whoever or whatever was out there knew exactly where we were inside. Each knock landed near a window, then the door, then the front panel. Lucas stirred, mumbling in his sleep. Maggie whimpered, curling tighter against Erin. The smell hit next. That same metallic dampness seeped through the vents, thick and sour like wet pennies and old leaves. My stomach turned. Erin gagged quietly. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched, tight and unnatural. Then a new sound emerged, so soft at first I thought I imagined it. Breathing, right outside the door, not animal breathing, too controlled, too patient. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and checked the time. 12:47 a.m. No signal bars. Of course there weren't. The Smokies swallowed reception like they swallowed sound. The door handle shifted, just a fraction, enough to make the latch click softly. Erin squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. I didn't pull away. Daddy? Lucas whispered, eyes open now, glassy with fear. Someone's here. I know, I said quietly. Stay still. The handle moved again, slow, testing, like it was learning. Then, impossibly, a voice spoke. It came from just outside the door, low and careful, stretched thin like it wasn't used to forming words. Caleb. My blood went cold. I had never told anyone at the campground my name. Erin began to shake uncontrollably. Maggie started crying, soft at first, then louder, panic spilling out of her in broken sobs. The voice paused, as if listening, as if pleased. Your kids are scared, it said. The words were wrong. The tone was wrong. Like someone repeating a phrase they'd heard once and didn't understand. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My chest felt crushed, breath shallow and fast. The voice shifted closer to the door. You should let us in. Us. A sharp knock followed, harder than before, rattling the door in its frame. That was when instinct finally overrode fear. I hit the panic button on the RV's alarm. The sound exploded into the night. Shrill, violent, impossible to ignore. Lights flashed. Somewhere down the lane, someone shouted in confusion. Outside, something recoiled. I heard movement. Fast now, scrambling backward through gravel, then leaves, then silence as the forest swallowed it whole. The alarm kept screaming. I didn't turn it off for a full minute. When I finally did, the campground buzzed with uneasy energy. A few doors opened. Someone called out, asking if everything was okay. I cracked the door just enough to answer, my eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the lights. False alarm, I said. My voice sounded wrong even to me. No one questioned it. People want explanations that let them go back to sleep. We didn't sleep again that night. Just before dawn, as the sky began to pale, I stepped outside one last time. The cold had lifted. The air smelled normal again, pine and dirt and smoke from dying campfires. But near the rear of the RV, pressed into the soft gravel, were footprints. Bare, too long, too narrow, and facing the forest. We left as soon as the sun cleared the ridge. I didn't stop at the ranger station. I didn't look back at the trailhead. The kids were quiet the entire drive, each lost in their own version of the night. Erin stared out the window, jaw clenched, eyes hollow. It wasn't until miles later that she spoke. It knew your name, she said. I nodded. And it stopped at the lights, she continued, like it was following rules. That thought stayed with me long after we crossed out of Tennessee, long after the kids stopped waking up screaming, long after the smell faded from my memory. Some trails don't want to be walked anymore. Some places remember the people who leave. And some things don't chase you to catch you, only to remind you they could have. We didn't talk about it for a long time after we got home. Not really. Not in full sentences. The kind that force you to admit something followed you out of the woods. Life resumed its shape the way it always does. School mornings, work emails, grocery lists, oil changes. On the surface, we slipped back into routine so smoothly it almost convinced me that night near the Smoky Mountains had been a shared hallucination born from fatigue and fear. Almost. But fear doesn't evaporate. It settles. Lucas stopped running ahead of me on trails. Maggie began sleeping with her door open, a lamp burning all night. Aaron developed a habit of checking locks twice, 3 times, even when we were home in a quiet Kentucky neighborhood surrounded by familiar trees. And me, I stopped camping. That was how I knew it had marked me. Weeks later, curiosity crept in where denial used to live. Curiosity is fear's quieter cousin. It tells you you're being rational, that understanding is the same thing as safety. One night after Aaron and the kids were asleep, I opened my laptop and searched for Ridge Pass Trail Smoky Mountains. There was almost nothing. No official maps, no recent photos, just a handful of buried forum posts, years old, written by people who sounded embarrassed even as they typed. Hikers who mentioned hearing knocking sounds, campers who described voices carrying through the trees at dusk. One post ended abruptly after a sentence that read, "It followed the sound of my breathing until..." No follow-up, no username activity afterward. I dug deeper. Ridge Pass wasn't always a recreational trail. In the early 1900s, it had been a service route used to transport timber, then later supplies during the construction of isolated mountain settlements. Records showed multiple disappearances logged along that stretch over decades. Loggers, travelers, entire families moving through the mountains before roads carved them open. The detail that made my stomach drop came from a scanned newspaper clipping dated 1936. A family camping near what would later become the RV park had reported persistent knocking from the woods, followed by a failed attempt to enter their tent using voices that mimicked their children. Only one member of that family made it out alive. The article didn't say how. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the house breathe around me, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of cooling pipes, ordinary sounds, safe sounds. But my body didn't believe that anymore. That's the lesson no one warns you about when they talk about loving the outdoors. The wilderness doesn't just test your strength or your planning, it tests your boundaries. It watches how far you're willing to go past discomfort, past instinct, past the quiet voice that says, "Turn back now." I'd ignored that voice because I wanted to be right, because I wanted to be the kind of father who wasn't afraid, because I believed experience made me immune. What that thing on Ridge Pass taught me, without ever laying a hand on us, was that fear doesn't need violence to leave scars. Sometimes all it has to do is let you go. Months passed. Summer turned to fall, leaves changed, the kids slowly laughed easier again. Aaron relaxed just a little, and I started to feel foolish for how deeply the experience had cut into me. Until October. We were carving pumpkins on the back porch when I heard it. 3 soft knocks. Not on the door, on the wooden railing behind me. My heart stuttered. I froze, knife hovering over orange flesh. Erin noticed immediately. She always noticed. "What is it?" she asked. I forced myself to breathe. Listened. Nothing. The kids laughed, arguing over whose pumpkin looked scarier. A breeze rustled leaves across the yard. I told myself it was wood contracting in the cooling air. Told myself I was projecting. That night, after everyone was asleep, I stepped onto the porch alone. The air smelled like damp leaves, and something else underneath it. Metallic. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear breathing. But I felt watched in the same way I had on the trail, like attention was being paid to me, carefully, patiently. That was when I understood the final truth. It wasn't tied to the Smoky Mountains. It was tied to listening, to patterns, to vulnerability, to moments when people drift just far enough from the noise of the world that something else can hear them clearly. The knocking never came again after that night. Not at the house, not anywhere else. But the fear didn't need to return to stay effective. I sold the RV that winter, not because I hated it, but because every time I looked at it, I remembered how confident I'd been when I parked it near that trail. How certain I was that preparation and experience gave me control over places that don't recognize ownership. We still go outside. We still hike, but we stop when the forest goes quiet now. We turn back when something feels off, even if there's no reason we can explain, especially then. And I teach my kids something I never learned growing up. Nature doesn't owe you peace, it doesn't owe you beauty, and it doesn't owe you safety. If you're lucky, it lets you pass through unnoticed. If you're not, it reminds you how thin the line is between being a visitor and being invited. Because some trails don't end where the map says they do. Some encounters don't need teeth or claws to change you. And some knocks aren't meant to be answered, only remembered. I still hear them sometimes, not with my ears, but in the moment just before I decide to push forward instead of turning back, that's when I stop, that's when I listen, and that's how my family made it home. The first thing I noticed was the silence, how it didn't belong there, how it felt staged, like the bayou itself was holding its breath and waiting for me to make a mistake. My name is Marcus Hale. I was 39 years old in September of 2019, and I had driven my aging Class C RV down into the Atchafalaya Basin because I believed, honestly believed, that solitude could still fix things that people couldn't. I grew up in Baton Rouge, but life had pulled me north, into highways and schedules and fluorescent lights. That weekend, I wanted water instead of traffic, trees instead of screens, and a place where my thoughts could finally slow down enough for me to hear them. The campground wasn't official. No gate, no ranger station, no posted rules. Just a narrow gravel turnoff swallowed by cypress trees and Spanish moss that drooped low enough to brush the roof of the RV as I eased forward. The air was thick, warm, and sour-sweet with rot and wet earth. It smelled alive in a way cities never do. Too alive, almost intimate, like the land was already aware of me. I parked near the water's edge, tires sinking slightly into mud that never fully dried. The basin stretched out in all directions, a maze of dark channels and tree roots clawing at the surface like skeletal hands. The sun was already leaning west, filtering through the canopy in thin amber blades. I told myself I'd picked the spot because it felt untouched. The truth was, I picked it because no one else was there. That should have been the first warning. I went through my routine on autopilot, leveling the RV, checking the generator, testing the lights. Everything worked. Inside, the familiar hum of electricity felt comforting, like a heartbeat. I cooked a simple meal, ate alone at the small dinette, listening to cicadas rev up as daylight faded. Their sound wasn't peaceful. It was aggressive, layered, relentless. A wall of noise meant to drown out thought. As night fell, the temperature dropped just enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. The smell changed too. Sharper, heavier, carrying something metallic underneath the damp sweetness. I noticed it while washing my hands, staring at my reflection in the RV's small mirror. My eyes looked tired, older than I remembered. I told myself that was normal. That's what time does. Outside, something splashed in the water, probably a fish or a gator. I didn't look. I locked the door anyway. The first knock came just after 9:30 p.m. It wasn't loud. That was the unsettling part. 3 soft taps spaced evenly, like someone testing the surface of a wall rather than trying to get attention. I froze mid-step, my socked foot hovering above the vinyl floor. The cicadas stopped at the exact same moment, plunging the world into a sudden, unnatural quiet. "Probably another camper," I muttered, though my voice sounded thin even to me. I waited. No voice followed. No shuffle of footsteps, just the quiet hum of my RV and the faint creak of trees swaying somewhere beyond the windows. After a full minute, I moved again. I didn't open the door. I flicked the porch light on instead, flooding the immediate area with a dull yellow glow. Through the small side window, I saw nothing but hanging moss and the suggestion of water beyond it. No silhouette, no movement. I told myself I imagined it. That lie lasted exactly 12 minutes. The second knock came from the back of the RV. This one was slower, heavier, not tapping, pressing. Like a palm laid flat against the fiberglass, followed by a dragging sound that made my stomach tighten. I felt it through the floor, a vibration that didn't belong to any animal I knew. "Hey," I called out, louder than I meant to. "You all right out there?" The words echoed too far, swallowed by the trees. No response came back. I checked the rear camera monitor. Static. Just grain and distortion, as if the lens were submerged underwater. I tapped the screen. Nothing changed. That's when the power cut out. No flicker, no warning. Just darkness, complete and immediate. The hum died in my ears, replaced by the sudden, crushing awareness of how isolated I was. The bayou rushed back into existence all at once, insects screaming, water lapping, wood groaning as something heavy shifted its weight nearby. I stood there, heart hammering, hands clenched into fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. The smell came back stronger now, seeping through the RV's vents. Mud, decay, and something else beneath it. Something sour and animal, like wet fur left too long in the sun. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on with shaking fingers. The beam cut a narrow tunnel through the darkness, illuminating the cramped interior in harsh white slices. Everything looked wrong under that light, too sharp, too close. I checked the breaker panel. Everything was tripped, generator dead, battery backup, unresponsive. That didn't make sense. The knocking started again. This time, it wasn't one place. It came from the side, then the front, then the back end, overlapping in a way that made it impossible to tell how many there were. The rhythm wasn't random. It was exploratory, curious, like fingers learning the shape of something new. My mind scrambled for explanations, kids playing a prank, hunters passing through, even animals standing on hind legs and pawing at the walls. Each possibility felt thinner than the last, dissolving under the weight of what my body already knew. I killed the flashlight and crouched low, pressing my eye to the narrow window by the dinette. Outside, the porch light was gone. The basin was pitch black except for a faint glow of moonlight reflecting off the water. And there, just at the edge of that reflection, I saw movement. Not fast, not sudden. Figures. They stood where the trees thinned, half hidden by moss and shadow. Tall. Still. Too still. Their outlines wavered, not because they were moving, but because my eyes struggled to focus on them, like they didn't fully belong to the space they occupied. One of them stepped forward. The smell intensified instantly, flooding my senses, making my eyes water. I pressed a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Another step. I realized then that the knocking had stopped. They weren't testing anymore. They were waiting. And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath logic and pride, and the part of me that still wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding, something ancient and undeniable finally surfaced. The certainty that if I opened that door, nothing waiting outside would see me as human at all. I stayed crouched there longer than my legs wanted to allow, muscles trembling, lungs burning from shallow, careful breaths that sounded too loud in my own head. The figures didn't rush. That was the worst part. Predators that rush are afraid of losing something. Whatever stood outside my RV had all the time in the world. One of them shifted its weight, and the water near the tree line rippled outward in slow, lazy circles. I noticed then how tall it was. Not exaggerated tall, not monstrous, just wrong enough to register. Its shoulders sloped forward as if it had learned posture by watching humans from a distance, copying without understanding. When it tilted its head, the movement was delayed, like a thought reaching a body a second too late. I felt the instinct to shout, to assert myself, to remind whatever it was that I existed and wasn't easy prey. That instinct died quickly. The silence out there felt reactive, listening. The bayou wasn't asleep, it was alert. My flashlight lay on the counter behind me. I didn't dare reach for it. Light would make me visible. Light would turn the RV into a fishbowl. Another figure stepped forward, then another. 3. They didn't walk the same way. One glided, barely disturbing the mud. One lifted its legs too high, as if unsure where the ground ended. The third dragged something behind it, a foot, maybe, or something longer that traced a crooked line through the muck. My throat tightened. I thought of my wife, of how she'd begged me not to camp alone anymore after what happened years earlier, the accident I never spoke about, the one that left me convinced I could outdrive, outthink, outrun anything life threw at me. Standing there, watching those shapes gather, I realized how deeply I'd confused isolation with strength. A soft sound reached me through the walls. Not knocking. Breathing. It came from the passenger side, close enough that I could imagine fog forming on the window if it had been cold. Slow, measured, curious. I clenched my jaw as the smell surged again, strong enough now that I tasted it at the back of my tongue. My stomach rolled. Something brushed against the RV. Not bumped. Brushed. The fiberglass creaked, protesting under gentle pressure. Fingers, or something shaped like fingers, slid along the side panel, tracing seams, lingering on the doorframe. I shut my eyes, every nerve ending screaming for me to move, to do something, anything. Then came the voice. It wasn't clear, it wasn't loud. It was barely more than air shaped by a throat that didn't use words often, but it carried cadence, intention. Hello? The sound seeped through the RV walls like damp, settling into my bones. It wasn't right. The pitch wavered, climbing and dropping unpredictably, as if multiple attempts at speech were layered over each other and released at once. It sounded like someone remembering how people talked, rather than actually knowing. I didn't answer. Light, gone, the voice continued, closer now. You, inside. The denial cracked. There was no rationalizing this away. No animal mimics sentences. No lost camper speaks like that. My hands shook violently as I crawled backward, putting distance between myself and the door. The floor felt cold, though the air was still heavy and warm. The rear of the RV shuddered slightly. A dull thud followed, then another. Testing blows, measured, spaced. Not strong enough to break through. Not yet. They were learning how much force was needed. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the flashlight, clicking it on before fear could stop me. The beam cut across the interior, then through the front window as I aimed it outside. The light caught one of them full in the chest. It flinched, not back but sideways, twisting its torso away while keeping its head pointed directly at me. The face, God, the face, wasn't deformed. That would have been easier. It was almost human. Almost. Skin stretched too tight over bone, eyes reflecting the beam in a flat, glassy way that showed no emotion, just awareness. The mouth hung open slightly, lips dry and cracked, moving as if silently practicing words. The others reacted differently. One raised an arm to shield its eyes. Another let out a low sound, somewhere between a growl and a laugh, and stepped closer. I killed the light. The darkness returned instantly, thicker now, angry at having been disturbed. The thudding at the rear grew louder, more confident. A seam groaned. Panic finally broke free. I lunged for the driver's seat, hands slipping on the wheel as I twisted the key. Nothing. Dead. No ignition, no dash lights, not even a click. I tried again, harder, like force could change reality. The voice came again, right outside the windshield. Open. The word was clearer this time, firmer, commanding. I backed away, bumping into the kitchenette, knocking over a chair. The crash echoed like a gunshot. Outside, movement surged in response. Water splashed violently. The RV rocked as something slammed into the side panel with enough force to make a cabinet door burst open. I grabbed the only thing within reach, a heavy wrench from the toolbox under the sink, and held it uselessly in front of me. My chest burned. Sweat poured down my spine. The smell became unbearable, a choking mix of swamp gas and something rotten beyond recognition. My eyes streamed tears as the front door handle rattled, twisting experimentally. Slow. Patient. I thought, absurdly, of all the times I'd ignored my instincts in the past. All the times I'd told myself I was overreacting. Standing there, trapped in that dark metal box while something outside learned how to get in, I understood the cost of that habit. The handle stopped moving. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Then the pounding came all at once. Front, back, side, coordinated, violent. The RV lurched on its suspension. A window spiderwebbed, glass whining under pressure. I screamed then. I didn't recognize my own voice. And just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence slammed heavier than the noise had been. My ears rang. I sagged against the counter, barely able to stay upright. Minutes passed. Or seconds. Or seconds. Time lost its meaning. Then I heard it. The engine. Not mine. A distant rumble cut through the swamp, growing louder, closer. Headlights swept through the trees, flashing white through the windows. The figures reacted instantly, retreating, melting back into shadow with startling speed, slipping between cypress trunks as if the forest itself opened to accept them. I collapsed to the floor as the sound of a pickup truck pulled into the clearing. Voices shouted. Flashlights swept the ground. I stayed where I was, shaking uncontrollably, until a knock, human this time, loud and clumsy, hit the door. "Sir? You all right in there?" I opened the door and fell into the light, sobbing, unable to explain what I'd seen, what I'd smelled, what had tried to come inside with me. They told me later the power outage had affected several miles of the basin, that I was lucky they'd driven through when they did. Lucky. As I watched their headlights disappear down the gravel road an hour later, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever lived out there didn't leave because it was afraid. It left because it had been interrupted. And as I drove away at dawn, the bayou fog curling around my tires like fingers reluctant to let go, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. I'd been dismissed. I didn't stop driving until the sun was high enough to burn the fog off the road, until the bayou loosened its grip and the trees thinned into something that resembled civilization. Even then, my hands stayed locked around the steering wheel, knuckles white, jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Every shadow at the edge of the highway looked like it might lean forward and step into my path. Every smell of damp earth that drifted through the vents sent a jolt of adrenaline straight through my chest. I told myself I was safe. That lie didn't last long either. I pulled into a truck stop just outside of Morgan City, parked under harsh fluorescent lights, and sat there with the engine running, afraid of the silence that would come when I turned it off. My reflection in the windshield looked like someone else's. Eyes bloodshot, skin gray, posture folded inward like I was trying to make myself smaller. When I finally shut the engine down, the sudden quiet felt violent. Inside the restroom, I washed my face again and again, scrubbing until my skin burned. The smell lingered. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it off me. Swamp rot and wet metal and that sour animal edge, it clung like a memory that had learned how to breathe. I didn't call my wife. I didn't call anyone. There was a part of me that already understood how this would sound, how easily it could be filed away as stress, exhaustion, imagination fueled by isolation and darkness. The same part of me had made those excuses all night long while danger tested the walls around me. Instead, I drove home. For weeks afterward, sleep became something I negotiated with, not something I trusted. I'd drift off only to wake at the faintest sound, a branch brushing the house, a car passing too slowly on the street. Sometimes I'd hear knocking in my dreams, soft and patient, and wake with my heart racing, convinced I could smell the bayou in my bedroom. What stayed with me most wasn't the fear. It was the feeling of being studied. The way those figures hadn't rushed, the way they'd waited, learned, adapted. Predators don't need to understand you to hunt you, but those things had wanted to understand. That realization sat heavy in my chest, Dazdak reshaping the way I saw the world. I stopped trusting empty places, stopped romanticizing solitude, because solitude isn't empty, it's observant. A month after the incident, curiosity, or maybe denial, got the better of me. I searched online for stories from the Atchafalaya Basin, missing persons reports, strange encounters, power outages followed by unexplained sightings. I found fragments, comments buried under old forum posts, hunters talking about voices that didn't belong to any animal they knew, fishermen describing shapes that stood upright in the water at night, watching from a distance. None of them had stayed long enough to be certain. That's when I understood something that chilled me more than anything I'd experienced that night. The basin didn't trap people, it filtered them. Those who ignored their instincts stayed. Those who listened left, changed, shaken, carrying warnings they struggled to put into words. I sold the RV that winter. Not because I stopped loving the road, but because I learned the difference between movement and escape. You can drive 1,000 miles and still bring the wrong kind of attention with you if you don't understand where you are and what you're stepping into. I still camp sometimes, still seek quiet, but I choose places with boundaries now, with lights, with people close enough to hear you scream if you need to. And I never ever camp where the land feels like it's listening. Because once you've felt that, once you've realized the darkness isn't empty but patient, you don't come back the same. That night in September of 2019 taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. The wilderness doesn't care about your confidence, your plans, or your need for peace. It doesn't announce itself as dangerous. It waits for you to assume it isn't. And somewhere deep in the Atchafalaya Basin, when the lights go out and the cicadas fall silent, I believe those figures are still there, standing just beyond the tree line, tilting their heads, practicing words they don't quite understand yet, waiting for the next person who mistakes silence for safety. The cold that night didn't just bite, it listened. My name is Evan Mercer, and I was 38 years old when I learned that silence can have weight, that darkness can lean in close enough to breathe against your ear, and that fear doesn't always arrive screaming. It sometimes taps, gently, patiently, like metal on metal in the dead of winter. I've been RV camping most of my adult life. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, raised by a father who believed that if you stayed in motion long enough, the past couldn't catch you. By January of 2020, I'd already logged thousands of miles across the western United States in my aging silver Volkswagen Rialta. Compact, dependable, and just small enough to feel like an extension of my body when I slept inside it. I trusted that vehicle the way some people trust a church. It had carried me through deserts, coastal storms, and lonely stretches of Nevada highway where the radio fades into static like a dying heartbeat. Glacier National Park in winter wasn't supposed to be on that route, but grief doesn't care about plans. My older brother had died the previous spring. Heart attack, sudden, clean, unfair. He was the cautious one, the one who warned me about winter roads and isolation. And in the months after his death, I found myself doing the opposite of what he'd advise, as if daring the world to prove him right. Glacier in January felt like a test, or a punishment. I wasn't sure which. The RV lot I chose sat just outside the main park boundary, a plowed gravel clearing surrounded by pines so tall they erased the sky. The ranger station was closed for the season. No hookups, no neighbors. Just snow packed so hard it reflected the moonlight like bone. I arrived just before dusk. The temperature gauge on the dash read 11 Fahrenheit and falling. At first, the quiet felt peaceful, the kind of quiet you tell yourself you're craving. No engines, no voices, just the slow ticking of the engine cooling and the distant creak of trees adjusting to the cold. I leveled the Rialta, ran my safety checks, and stepped outside once more before night fully set in. That's when I noticed the smell. Not rot, not smoke. Something sharper. Metallic. Like cold iron and old batteries. It hung low, close to the ground, and it didn't belong to the forest. I told myself it was the snow, or my imagination. The mind reaches when it's alone too long. Inside, I locked the door, habit, not fear, and started the propane heater. The soft roar filled the cabin, comforting. I cooked a simple meal, ate standing up, and avoided looking out the windows longer than necessary. Outside felt too close, like it was waiting for me to notice it. By 9:30 p.m., the temperature had dropped further. The heater cycled more frequently. Every sound inside the RV seemed amplified. The rustle of my jacket, the creak of vinyl cushions, my own breathing. I turned on the radio for company, but the signal was weak. Snippets of weather alerts dissolved into static. Around 10, I heard the first knock. It wasn't loud. That's what unsettled me later when I replayed it in my mind. It was light, deliberate. A single tap against the side of the RV near the rear wheel well. I froze. In winter campgrounds, noises happen. Ice shifts, branches fall, animals investigate. I knew all that. I'd lectured others about it. So I waited, heart thudding, counting seconds. Nothing followed. I laughed, quietly, embarrassed with myself, and sat back down. My rational mind built explanations like scaffolding, contraction of metal, thermal stress, a pine cone dropping from a branch. I held on to those thoughts the way a drowning man clings to driftwood. Then it came again. This time, 2 taps. Tap, tap, metallic. Hollow, not the dull thud of ice or wood, not random. It sounded intentional. I stood slowly, my body already reacting before my thoughts caught up. The heater kicked on, its roar suddenly too loud, too obvious, as if announcing my presence to whatever stood outside. I turned it down and listened. The silence pressed in so hard my ears rang. I approached the side window, careful not to cast a shadow. The glass was rimmed with frost, opaque except for a small circle I wiped clear with my sleeve. The night beyond was awash of blue-gray snow and vertical black trees. No movement, no figures. The smell was stronger now. Iron, cold, wrong. Another knock, this one closer to the window. Tap. My breath fogged the glass, my pulse climbed into my throat. I wanted to call out to demand an answer, but something deep and old told me that voices invite things. Instead, I whispered my brother's name. I don't know why. Maybe part of me still expected him to answer. The knock came again. Harder. Not on the window this time, but on the door. Tap, tap, tap. 3 times, evenly spaced. No one knocked like that unless they wanted you to open up. I backed away, every step measured, my hands trembling despite the heat. My phone had no service. Of course it didn't. I checked anyway, my thumb hovering over the screen as if willing a signal into existence. Outside, something scraped along the side of the RV. Not dragging. Testing. A long, slow, metallic scrape like a tool being drawn across steel. My denial cracked then, not shattered, but fractured enough to let fear seep through. This wasn't wildlife. Bears don't knock, elk don't scrape metal with precision, and no human approaches an isolated RV in sub-zero temperatures without calling out. I moved into the cab and turned the ignition key halfway, just enough to light the dashboard. The headlights stayed off. The gauges flickered to life, casting pale green light across the windshield. That's when I saw the marks. Fresh lines etched into the frost on the exterior glass, just inches from my face. Parallel. Even. As if something had traced them deliberately, slowly, knowing I was inside watching. Another knock sounded, this time from the roof, directly above me. The Rialta creaked under a sudden shift of weight. Whatever was out there wasn't asking anymore. It was climbing. I remember thinking, not panicking yet, not fully, that I had made a mistake coming here alone. That pride had driven me farther than sense, that my brother would have turned around hours ago. The scraping grew louder, faster, moving toward the front of the RV. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt expectant, like a held breath. I sat there, engine cold, keys in my shaking hand, staring at the windshield as frost patterns crawled like veins across the glass. And then, right in front of my face, came the knocking again. From the inside. Not loud, not frantic, just a single patient tap against the dashboard metal, as if something already knew where I was sitting. I didn't scream. I didn't move. My body locked the way engines seize in extreme cold. Everything rigid, unresponsive, one wrong motion away from permanent damage. The tapping came again from the dashboard. Tap. Metal on metal, close enough that I felt the vibration through my knees. There is no rational explanation for a sound like that coming from inside a sealed RV. None that doesn't collapse under even a second of scrutiny. And yet my mind still tried. Loose panel, contracting bolts. Some bizarre acoustic illusion created by temperature and fear. But illusions don't wait. The tap shifted slightly to the left, closer to the steering column. Then again, as if something were mapping the interior by sound, learning the space the way blind fingers read Braille. I swallowed hard, the taste of iron suddenly filling my mouth. The smell outside, cold metal, batteries, ozone, had seeped in somehow, faint but unmistakable. I realized then that my hands were clenched so tight around the keys that my knuckles had gone numb. I turned the ignition. The engine protested, a slow grinding churn that sounded painfully loud in the stillness. For a moment, nothing happened. My chest tightened. I pictured myself trapped here, frozen in place while something methodical and patient waited for the machine to fail. Then the engine caught. The vibration rolled through the RV like a living thing, rattling cabinets, shaking frost loose from the windows. Relief hit me so fast it nearly made me dizzy. I reached for the headlight switch and stopped. Something moved across the windshield. Not fast, not lunging. A shadow slid from right to left, tall enough to block what little moonlight filtered through the trees. Its outline warped as it passed, stretched thin and wrong, as if it didn't fully agree with the shape it was wearing. The tapping stopped. In its place came a new sound. Breathing. Not animal, not ragged or frantic. Controlled, measured. Each inhale drawn out through something narrow, each exhale carrying that same metallic undertone, like air passing over rusted pipes. The windshield fogged from the outside. A handprint appeared in the frost, too long. Fingers elongated, pressed flat against the glass with enough pressure to squeal faintly. I could see the ridges where skin or something like it met ice. I slammed the headlights on. The light exploded across the lot, bleaching the snow, throwing hard shadows against the trees. The handprint vanished instantly, wiped away or withdrawn so fast it left no trace. Nothing stood in front of me. No person, no animal, no tracks beyond my own tires and the faint impressions of falling snow. But the breathing didn't stop. It came from everywhere now, from beneath the RV, from the roof, from inside the walls themselves, vibrating through the frame like a sound you feel more than hear. I put the vehicle in reverse. The tires spun uselessly at first, rubber screaming against packed ice. Panic surged, sharp and electric. I eased off, tried again, feathering the throttle the way my brother had taught me years ago during a winter drive through Idaho. "Slow," he'd said. "The mountain always wins if you rush it." The RV lurched backward an inch, then another. A loud bang slammed into the passenger side door, rocking the vehicle hard enough that I hit my head against the headrest. Pain flared white behind my eyes. The breathing spiked, no longer controlled, excited now, layered, overlapping, as if more than one source had joined in. The smell intensified. The tires finally found purchase. The Rialta slid backward, crooked, the rear end fishtailing toward a stand of trees. I cranked the wheel, heart hammering so hard I thought it might drown out every other sound. Something scraped along the roof again, fast this time, ending in a shrill metallic shriek that cut straight through me. Then weight. Heavy. Centered. The suspension dipped violently. Cabinets burst open, spilling gear across the floor. The steering wheel jerked in my hands. Whatever was on top of the RV wanted to stay there. I slammed the accelerator. The engine roared, the RV surging backward, then forward as I shifted into drive. Snow sprayed up, glittering in the headlights like shrapnel. The lot rushed past in a blur of white and black. The weight shifted forward. Not like an animal, no scrambling, no claws seeking, just but a smooth redistribution of mass, deliberate and confident, as if it knew exactly where balance lived. A sound like knuckles cracking echoed above me. I screamed then. Not words, just sound torn from my chest, raw and useless and human. The road out of the lot loomed ahead, a narrow ribbon of plowed snow leading back toward the highway. Trees closed in on either side, their shadows stretching long and warped under the headlights. The weight slid again. This time, it dropped. The impact shook the entire RV, followed by a skidding thud as something landed in front of me and rolled out of view. I swerved instinctively, the Rialta barely missing the shape sprawled across the snow. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. The road twisted downhill, ice-glazed and unforgiving. The RV shuddered as I fought to keep control, every instinct screaming to flee faster, faster, faster. In the rearview mirror, movement flickered. Not pursuit. Not exactly. Figures emerged at the edge of the headlight's reach, standing just beyond the plowed road where snow gave way to forest. Tall. Still. Too many of them to count. They didn't chase. They watched. As I sped away, the breathing faded, replaced by a deep, resonant knocking that echoed through the RV one last time. No longer close, but distant, like a signal passed from tree to tree. I didn't stop driving until the sky began to lighten hours later, the eastern horizon bruised purple and gray. By then, my hands were numb, my throat shredded, my thoughts unraveling in loops. At a gas station near Kalispell, I pulled over and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was unbearable. I sat there, shaking, forehead pressed to the steering wheel, tears freezing on my cheeks. When I finally stepped outside, daylight revealed what night had hidden. Scratches lined the roof. Deep, parallel, too precise. The passenger door bore a dent shaped almost like a palm, but stretched, distorted. The metal warped inward as if pressed by something stronger than muscle. And along the dashboard just beneath the steering column, 3 small dents marred the metal, evenly spaced. Tap, tap, tap. I sold the Rialta 3 months later. Couldn't bring myself to sleep in it again. I still camp, but never in winter, never alone, and never where the forest grows too quiet. Some places don't want witnesses. They just want you to open the door. I thought leaving Glacier would end it. That was my first mistake, believing fear has borders. For weeks after that night, I told myself I was safe because I was moving, because asphalt and headlights and people meant control. But fear doesn't care about geography. It waits. It settles into the quiet spaces you don't guard, the pauses between breaths, the moment just before sleep, the hum of a refrigerator at 3 in the morning when your mind starts filling in gaps it was never meant to explore. I didn't sleep for more than an hour at a time after Montana. When I closed my eyes, I heard it again. Not loud, not violent, just that patient metallic tapping, as if something had learned the rhythm of my thoughts and was keeping time. Tap, tap, tap. Always evenly spaced, always calm. Panic would have been easier to live with. Panic burns out. This didn't. This lingered. I started researching without admitting to myself why. At first, it was casual, park history, weather patterns, wildlife incidents. I told myself I was grounding the experience in facts, reclaiming it from imagination. But facts have edges, and once you cut yourself on them, you can't pretend they're harmless anymore. The RV lot I'd stayed in didn't officially exist. That was the first thing that surfaced. No listing, no seasonal permit records, just a vague reference in an archived Forest Service memo from the late 1980s, temporary winter access clearing, decommissioned after multiple safety concerns. No elaboration, no details. I dug deeper. Local forums mentioned it in passing, old posts, deleted usernames, stories that never gained traction because they sounded too strange, too vague, too cold to be entertaining. One comment stuck with me. It was years old, buried deep in a thread about winter camping mistakes. If you hear knocking in the trees, leave before it answers back. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, my hands starting to shake the same way they had around my keys that night. Eventually, I called a man whose name came up more than once, a retired park ranger named Cal Hollis, stationed near Glacier for over 3 decades. I didn't tell him everything. I said I'd had a strange experience winter camping and wanted historical context. He was quiet for a long time before responding. People always think winter is empty, he said finally. Like the land shuts off, but that's when you notice what doesn't leave. Cal told me the lot had been closed unofficially after a string of incidents stretching back to the 1970s. Campers reporting unexplained damage, scratches on vehicles that didn't match animal behavior, sounds that didn't fit the environment, metal where there shouldn't be metal, rhythms where randomness should rule. No bodies, no official disappearances tied directly to the site, just people who left early or left changed. Most folks rationalize it, he said, say it was ice, stress, isolation. And maybe that's true, but enough people reported the same details that we stopped sending rangers out there alone. That word, alone, landed heavy. I asked him about the knocking. Cal exhaled slowly. That's the part we don't write down, he said, because once you do, you're responsible for what it means. He explained that the area sat near old mineral survey routes from the early 1900s, failed extraction attempts, abandoned equipment, iron left to rust and sink into the land. He believed, not knew, that something about prolonged cold, isolation, and human absence changed the way sound behaved there, that maybe the land remembered shapes, patterns, intent. But memory doesn't explain intent, I said. No, he agreed. It doesn't. After that call, I stopped researching, not because I'd found answers, but because I realized I didn't want them. Understanding something gives you power over it, but some things don't want to be understood. They want to be respected, avoided, left alone. The dreams intensified after that. In them, I was back in the RV, but the engine never turned over. The heater never worked. The knocking came from everywhere at once, until the sound itself took shape, until it stood in the center of the lot, tapping against nothing, practicing. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing, convinced for just a second that I could smell iron in my apartment. Time passed, slowly, unevenly. I started camping again that spring, easing myself back into it like testing ice with a stick. Busy campgrounds, warm nights, familiar sounds, laughter, generators, wind through leaves instead of frozen branches snapping under pressure. But something in me had shifted. I no longer chased solitude the way I used to. I listened differently. I paid attention to what felt wrong, even when nothing looked wrong. And when my instincts whispered, even quietly, I listened. That's the lesson Glacier carved into me. Not that the world is full of monsters waiting to tear you apart, but that some places don't operate on human rules. Out there, I wasn't prey, I wasn't hunted, I was evaluated. And I failed the first test by being alone, the second by staying when the knocking started. I don't tell this story to scare you away from camping. I tell it because the road romanticizes isolation, especially in America. The idea that solitude equals strength, that being alone proves something. Sometimes being alone just makes you easier to study. If you take anything from my experience, let it be this: the environment is not neutral. It watches, it responds, it remembers. And when it reaches out, when it knocks, you owe it the humility to leave, because panic will get you killed. But denial will invite you to open the door. I didn't walk away from that night with bravery. I walked away with scars you can't photograph. For a long time after Glacier, I believed the worst part was over, that the land had tested me, found me lacking, and let me go. That belief helped me function. It let me grocery shop, talk to friends, sit in crowded diners without scanning every reflective surface for movement that didn't belong. But fear doesn't always follow you forward. Sometimes it waits for you to stop moving. It was late summer when I finally understood that what happened in that RV lot hadn't ended when I crossed the park boundary. I was camped in Idaho then, a small, well-lit campground near a river, families nearby, laughter drifting between sites, the smell of grilled meat and pine sap in the air. Safe. Normal. Everything Glacier wasn't. That night, as I lay in my newer RV, listening to the harmless noises of people settling in, I heard something that snapped me awake so hard my heart stuttered, a sound from beneath the floor, not knocking, practicing, a faint, irregular tap, pause, tap, tap, as if something were trying to remember the pattern, getting it wrong, adjusting. I sat up slowly, every muscle locked, my breath shallow. The sound stopped immediately, replaced by nothing but the river and distant voices. No smell, no pressure, no weight. That was when it hit me. Glacier hadn't followed me. It had taught me. It had shown me how thin the line really is, between safety and exposure, between confidence and arrogance. It taught me how quickly humans mistake silence for permission, how often we interpret untouched land as empty land. That night in Idaho, I didn't wait to see if the sound would return. I packed up and left before dawn, hands steady, mind clear. Because the difference between that night in Montana wasn't the environment, it was me. I no longer needed proof. I no longer needed answers. I had learned to trust the quiet signals, the ones that come before fear turns loud, before panic floods your body and steals your options. I had learned that survival isn't about dominance or courage or proving how far you can go alone. It's about listening when the world whispers instead of waiting for it to scream. I think about Glacier often, not with anger, not even with terror anymore. I think about it the way you think about something ancient and vast and utterly indifferent to your existence. The knocking wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. A question asked in metal and cold and patience. Do you know where you are? I didn't then. I do now. And if you're someone who loves the road, the long highways, the quiet lots, the promise of solitude at the edge of civilization, I'm not here to tell you to stop. I'm here to tell you to be honest with yourself about why you go. Go to reconnect. Go to breathe. Go to remember who you are when the noise fades. But don't go to challenge the dark, because the dark doesn't rise to meet challenges. It waits. And when it knocks, softly, deliberately, it's already close enough to touch the door. That night in January, frozen in fear in a forgotten RV lot, I learned the most important lesson of my life. Not every place wants you there. Not every silence is empty. And walking away isn't weakness. It's wisdom earned the hard way. The road will always be there, but you only get one chance to listen when it tells you to leave.